Welcome to New Light Living podcast with Ulrika Sullivan. Have you been feeling exhausted, overthinking your every action, and questioning your next goal? What if there's more to life than that? What if your analytical mind took a back seat and you just knew what was right for you? Ulrika Sullivan's multitasking, up in her head, stressful corporate career left her feeling like she was living on autopilot. She didn't know who she truly was. A complete career shift was carefully orchestrated by the universe to open her up to the deepest level of her soul and purpose. This led to a life-changing point of no return epiphany. There is an undeniable feeling of clarity and way forward available to us when we connect with our inner voice, heart's desire, and body consciousness. You are invited to expand beyond the rerun patterns of your mind and shift into heart-centered living. In Wisdom Beyond What You Know, how to shift from being driven by the mind to living from the heart and intuition, you're listening to the second very special episode in the three-part series, and it so happens that my book is launching today, January 11, 2022. In this episode, Patricia Lindner is interviewing me about having an inner conversation, inner transparency, and the 7 shifts presented in the book. You don't want to miss the story of my big point of no return. And of course, as of today, you can get your own copy of my book. Visit wisdombeyondbook.com.
What do you mean by this, the inner conversation about ourselves?
The inner conversation is constantly ongoing, I'll tell you, but it's not always that we're aware of it. And more often, we actually choose to ignore that inner conversation. But this whole shift has to do with getting to know what we truly tell ourselves. And there is a term inside in the book that I call inner transparency, which is, it's when you feel like your inner conversation actually shows on the outside. So there is transparency between your inner conversation about yourself, about others, but it actually shows on the outside. So your actions and how you show up is in concert with that. And that is a process to kind of, it requires observation on the inside, on like what really is going on. Because sometimes when we are relying on our external world to tell us the answers, there might be conflict sometimes in what we truly want and what the external world is telling us to do.
Yeah.
And I'm sure all of us have felt that, like to some point. And that's where there's lack of inner transparency there in terms of how we follow through in the external world based on our resistance on the inside. I don't know if that helps, but it's a process of observation and being honest with ourselves on the inside.
Okay, so this sounds like growing the awareness and growing the consciousness about who we really are at the core. And as you mentioned, this inner transparency. No.
Yes.
Yeah.
Inner transparency.
The inner transparency, because I really love this. It is like, do I need to become transparent about what is going on in the inside? I am my inside, but I think this is so important what you mentioned. It is going beyond what we know. And I think this is exactly what you say in the title, going beyond the wisdom. And there are several shifts that you talk about in this book. And was this inner transparency one of the shifts? And are there other shifts that you think are really helpful and guiding us to this inner growth and connection to ourselves?
Yes, the book is divided into 3 parts. And the first part is really talking about common patterns that we may be living according to when we are mind driven. The second part of the book is really focused around the fundamentals around what is heart-centered living and the elements of that. And the third part of the book is going through each of these shifts. There are 7 shifts in the book that are presented, how we can shift from being driven by the mind to living from the heart and intuition. And the first shift that I suggest in the book is really to go from our comfort zone of where we are today and into a commitment to change. And I've learned by working with many clients that unless that commitment is there is always a pull back to the comfort zone. And the inner negotiation with ourselves that we have to stay in the comfort zone for multitude of reasons. But once the commitment is there from the heart, there is no point of return. Point of no return, but I call it sometimes no point of return, because then there is not a question, not a doubt within where this is going. And in the book, I also share my own story of point of no return. And that's what really starts out the book. Because for me, there was no doubt. Once that had clicked in, that commitment to change, there was like, I couldn't go back. And that's really the first shift of the book. And there are 7 shifts that builds on each other in the book. The second that we talked about too, the second shift is from being disconnected from ourselves. And that is kind of that lack of inner transparency and not being aware of our inner conversation. But once we start to get curious and become more and more self-aware of this dynamic because a lot of times our mind comes up with stories and we believe those stories. But once we start to kind of question, is this really what I believe in? Is this really what I value? Is this really, like, if we truly slow down and listen to our true self that is speaking to us constantly, but that we often ignore, that's when the shift is happening from not knowing what we're good at or not knowing what we want to actually knowing all of a sudden that, oh, I really love this, or I really do not need to be around this person anymore. Right? So yeah, that's a huge shift. And without, both coming into commitment and self-awareness, we cannot move on from there and up. So yeah, I'm very curious to see how these shifts are working out for others.
Yeah, and I was really caught by what you said, and I had 2 things popping up in my mind. And the first one was that it is really worthwhile reading this book because it sounds like tangible steps that people get out of this book in any situation in their lives when they want to get more out of their lives, even when they don't know the direction. And when you said there is this, how did you put it, the point of no return or no point of return?
It is called in the book the point of no return, because that's proper English. But when I first came up with this term, I said no point of return. But it's just simply, there's no going back.
And I had, as you know, that I am very visual, I had this image of someone in a boat on the water, on a river, and it is hard paddling. It is so hard. I saw this person, and this feels like the beginning of this journey. And then there are the currents or even a waterfall. And when you reach this point that is too close to this flow of transformation, like a waterfall, you can't go back and turn around. But first of all, it is sometimes a struggle to really go and move the boat forward. And so I had this visual of when you reach this point, then it flows. And then you can really have this more in your life. And I don't know if you can relate to this picture, if this is something that goes with your book.
Yes,
Yeah.
I can totally relate to that image of, yeah, there's really no going back. And I love that image of the waterfall. And because, yeah, that's how it is. Like, and that's what I want for others who are in the process of transformation too, and know there is this nagging feeling of that there is more, and this waterfall is coming up, right? But it feels, uncertainty, all those feelings that we go through. But at a certain point, there is just, 100% commitment. We're going. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And I'm so happy that I know you and that I soon will be able to read this book. So thank you so much, Ulrika, for this amazing interview.
Yes, thank you. And actually the book is getting launched today. So I'm going to leave a link below for how you can get it. And also, yeah, I can't wait to hear your comments on the book.